Today we are off to Bolivia to taste 2 different coffees for our subscription package. And I'm joined today by Casper.
Thank you.
Who's actually been to Bolivia.
Yes, I have.
Unlike me. And Bolivia is an interesting country when you talk coffee production. They didn't actually start to produce coffee until the 1970s, so it's quite a young coffee production. Around 2000, the US government, via their US aid program, decided to invest in the Bolivian economy. And so they invested into coffee trees, into coffee plantations, and gave trees to farmers there. Production then peaked around 2006, but since then the production in Bolivia has actually gone down significantly. Probably because when they planted these trees, it was in organic soil. They used organic harvesting and growing methods, as they had a very sort of passive approach to farming at that point. They didn't enrich the soil, and thus the yields started to drop over time. This has left a lot of Bolivian coffee farmers in sort of a crisis, so they either changed to other crops like cocoa production, or simply stopped producing coffee and went to other kind of businesses. But Casper, what is it that we're gonna taste? You can talk a little while I pour.
So we have our good friends there that we buy coffee from, Rodriguez family. Both of these coffees are sourced through their company. So one of them is from their own farm, and one is from a program they have called Sol de Mañana. And Sol de Mañana,
tomorrow, or the morning sun.
That is a direct result to this whole coffee crisis that has been in Bolivia. When the production was at its peak, it was around 120,000 bags they produced per year. Now it's down around 25,000 only. So it's dropped significantly, and that's something that's been status quo around there for the last 4 or 5 years. The thing is that cocoa production is much easier in Bolivia. There's not really any laws against this, so you get a crop that you can constantly harvest throughout the year. The Rodriguez family could see that they had all these great coffees in the area, but production was extremely low. So it was around maybe per hectare 2.5 bags or so, which is extremely low. Now, due to their practices that they teach farmers, we're around up to 20 bags per hectare. So it's like significantly increasing. All of a sudden, the coffee production is something that's actually valuable and you can actually make a living of, instead of it just being something that's not really feasible. It's been a great thing for them to invest in and given knowledge back to the farmers, teach them how to prune, how to use fertilizers in a good manner, get a better crop.
And the Rodriguez family is the father, Pedro, his daughter, Daniela, who does a lot of the marketing and like selling of the coffee, and then also his son, also called Pedro.
He's the one who studied agriculture, so he's the one who has all the education and actually brought back all these techniques to Bolivia. Before they entered the market, and that's pretty late, it was around 2014, I think they got their first farm. Things were just growing wild, kind of what you see in Ethiopia. But in Ethiopia, it kind of works because you have huge farms. Here you have like extremely small single farmers. And when you just leave the coffee to grow wild, the harvest is just going to go down significantly. But they were afraid to prune trees because they were afraid to get less coffee out of it. But here a family comes in and shows how to run it with all the knowledge that you have from other countries. And at first, all the local producers were super skeptical, of course. But they managed to convince 10 farmers at first to join this program, and then when the neighbors saw how they just immediately got way bigger harvests, more and more just joined.
And that's the program, the Sol de Mañana.
Exactly.
Sun of tomorrow. So the Los Rodriguez is the family name, and it actually covers what they call the fincas Los Rodriguez, because they have several different farms that they own themselves. They have 7 in this area, Caranavi. And then you said
another 5 in Samaipata, which is closer to Santa Cruz.
Yes. And when we say farms, it is more like different plots of land.
It is.
And so these 2 coffees are processed very differently.
Exactly.
But especially on the Los Rodriguez, you'll probably see it's a Coco Natural. And just explain briefly, what is a Coco Natural?
So it's a slow processed natural coffee, and it really gives this distinct fruity character. So the way they approach their naturals is that they dry it first at raised African beds, but they do it inside, so it's covered. And they do that for 7 days, and then they move them to these cocoa dryers, as they say. And it's these big square machines where they can keep a very steady temperature, and it never goes above 40 degrees, and it's there for 35 hours. So it's actually a pretty fast drying, And that means that they can control it quite well. So it's like a mix of two different drying techniques.
Yeah, and what they say is that it's more for dehydration than a drying. And that might sound like weirdly technical, but I think the point is that it's with lower heat. So with typical drying, you actually get quite high heat, but here you get more dehydration. You have a more efficient means of transporting moisture out of the cherries. That also minimizes the amount of fermentation that will happen inside each of these coffee cherries as well. And the result is quite remarkable because you have these very shiny coffee cherries when they're dried, which is usually very wrinkly, but here they're almost not wrinkly at all. They're very shiny and very sort of dense. That was the Rodriguez. How's the Sol de Mañana processed?
So that's an anaerobic washed coffee.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? It's been fermented in tanks with no air.
So the whole coffee cherry, straight after picking, is put in these tanks.
Yeah.
There's no air, but there's a fermentation happening anaerobically, but with the whole cherry. But then typically that's then dried as an anaerobic natural.
Exactly.
But here they depulp it and then wash it. Yes.
Yeah. So you don't get that super funky, intense fruit that you sometimes get from the anaerobic processed coffees.
Yeah.
Here it just adds a bit of layers of fruit so that you could say it's not like a Kenyan coffee, but you get some of those fruity characters going and then still have a super clean cup.
All right, so when you're tasting these two coffees, Kasper, what should people pay attention to?
I mean, I think I would start with the Sol de Mañana coffee. It's your washed coffee, it's less in your face, it's really mild, nice, balanced.
I would still say compare this to one of our washed Colombians. It's a lot more fruity, like wild. You still taste part of that anaerobic fermentation, this kind of cascara, the fruit pulp, kind of flavor to it as well. So like a fruity note, but also a nice clean finish. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, you get some florals as well. I think it's nice body, good sweetness, really clean.
Yeah.
Nice finish.
Yeah.
And then you jump into the Rodriguez.
Yeah, immediately much bigger on the palate. It's like really heavy and like syrupy.
For me, it's just explosive. It's like it's blowing my mind how intense something can be in fruit and acidity, and it just goes to the border on all scores for me. But just it never surpasses it. So it's such a intense coffee.
Yeah. And I think that goes for me too, that it's a very funky wild coffee, but it's on the right side of that border crossing over to something that would be over fermented or anything. It's definitely on the clean side. And for me, there's a lot of like rum raisin. Like I always think about this, the Rittersport, the chocolate with rum raisin, because you have chocolate in it, you have, this rum raisin finish to it. There's a little bit boozy.
Yeah, there's definitely like there's cacao, and there's also all these. There's plum, there's dried apricot, but there's also just fresh fruit. So it's just a big mix of everything in coffee brought into one cup.
And I think both of these coffees are really super interesting, both brewed as filter in whatever style you do there, and especially also as espresso. I think as espresso you're gonna have some really intense experiences here. It's gonna be really fun for you to dial in. Really do experiment with, going slightly lower on the ratio if you really want to amplify all that intensity. It might be too much, and maybe you want to up your ratio a little bit. Yeah. So have fun playing around with these.
It's gonna be really fun.
And thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for 2 new delicious coffees.
Oh yeah.